Hey there. I want a bit of a roll, so I wanted to get some videos done while the boys were asleep, and while I've actually got some time and some focus on this. The videos that I'm doing this week, obviously, are to do with the National Adoption Awareness Week. But I wanted to talk about psychology. I wanted to sort of ask the question: is psychology the root of our crisis with mental health? Yes, it is. Um, Now, the reason that I feel that I can talk about psychology, first of all, what is psychology? Psychology is literally just the study of the mind. It is just people like myself who are obsessed with understanding how people work, how people tick, and basically, um, through research, they come up with fundamental principles um, that um, label people. And this is what I want to talk about. Why do I feel that I can talk about this? Well, pretty much. I mean, I've had psychological reports done on me since the age of 3. The first ever sort of assessment, I was 3. And then all the way through my teens, I had psychotherapists, psychologists, um, and then into my early sort of age, when I was 19, I was backwards and forwards into, well, even before then, up to from 15 really, I was backwards and forwards into A&E, and rather than them dealing with this as a physical issue, which it was, I was later at 22 diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I was always taken down the mental health route, and a lot of people are. A lot of people go to A&E with physical complaints and taken off to the mental health unit. Um, I was then actually in a mental health unit for 11 weeks when I was 19, and I got to see the inside of how psychotherapy and psychology units would, which, and this is back in the days when they were frying your brain. Um, and then when I chose to go to college, I took my study in GCSE law, GCSE psychology, business studies. Then I went on to do child psychology, criminology, and then I went on to do straight basic psychology, applied psychology, and then I went to do my degree in psychology. And from there, I decided not to go on to do my master's. And the reason that I decided not to do my master's in psychology was because I didn't believe in their practice. I didn't believe in the way that they were doing things. I didn't believe in the constructs of psychology and how they come up with their hypothesis, and I didn't believe in a lot of the statements that they were making, such as if you've been abused, therefore you will go on to abuse, and that was done based on their statistics that every person that they had asked who had abused had come from abuse, but they didn't ask people who haven't abused who've come from abuse. So that is a nil and void sample straight away. Um, so then I went into personal development. I started at the Coaching Academy, and then I went into NLP, got into Robbins. Excuse my throat, this is the EDS affecting me at the moment. And because I'm on and off quitting smoking. And then I went into all forms of different spiritual paths, every religion, every practice. I've read pretty much the majority of self-help books, everything on how to heal yourself, to your mind, to your body, to your soul. I got into The Secret. I went down lots of different rabbit holes and lots of different paths. But what I was trying to understand was trauma, because at the root of every psychological label is trauma, and trauma creates a fragmented self. Now, the reason that I feel that psychotherapy and psychology has what's we're now calling an absolute mental health a mental health crisis that's going on, and it's not the mental health that is the crisis, it's the root of the problem that is the crisis. And one of the reasons that I don't like psychology is because psychology works from where you are now, which is good and that's great. But what it does is it takes all your past thoughts and residual actions and defines you as you are now. And it doesn't move you to where you're going. And it also doesn't treat the trauma. Now, I feel that this is relevant because in order to take children, it is psychological reports that are pretty much the deciding fact on whether a parent is a significant risk to a child. And what they're basically doing is the majority of parents that have had their children taken have been labelled with borderline personality, narcissistic traits, um, BPD, which is basically trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, that's what they call it, bipolar, depression, and obviously from then it goes on to all these labels. Now, how does psychology create these labels? Well, basically, when you go and take your degree, you write a paper, and in that paper, you basically write a hypothesis, and that hypothesis may be take that people who abuse were abused as a child. So basically, what psychology will do is they will go around to a sample of people who potentially are in prison for abuse, and they will say, I've got to stick my charger. They will say, were you abused as a child? So basically, they get a sample of questions and they go to these people and they say, right, you have abused a child. We want to know where you were abused as a child. So they ask all these people and then they come back and they check, they run it through an SPS database, and that's basically what they use. It's called SPSS. And then they look at it, the median, the mean, and the mode, and they see whether or not there is a correlation between the amount of people that are held in prison that have abused a child and the correlation to whether they were abused as children. Yes, the majority is, you are probably going to find that the majority of people who are abused have had some form of trauma in their childhood, of course. But what that doesn't do is take the sample of people that don't abuse and asking them whether they were abused as a child. Now, if you actually took this sample from all people abused as a child and then looked at the balance of probability on how many of those went off to abuse and how many of those didn't, then you've got more reliable sample. But the majority of questionnaires are done based on 50 to 100 people, sometimes 10. The sample is taken, which is out of balance immediately. And the majority of psychologists, if you ask them, they will say that they manipulate the sample to prove their hypothesis. So, okay. So depression. Depression is a cluster of symptoms that mean that you are depressed. So, okay, take this guy here. Yeah, so we've got a guy sitting over there. Now, he's certainly not jumping for joy, is he? And running around all happy. So we could probably take it from them that he's sitting, he's in quite a submerged sort of fetal position. He's got his head down, his vibration is low, his characteristics is low, his mood is low. So therefore, we class this as depression. I class it as suppression because the majority of stuff is coming from outside. It's usually outside influences that are telling you that you can't do something. Exactly the same with borderline personality. Borderline personality is basically somebody who has a fragmented view of themselves. Now, that doesn't define who they are tomorrow. It only defines who they are today. Same with not borderline personality, bipolar. Bipolar is basically the mix between your serotonin and your dopamine. Same with depression, ups, downs. And, you know, again, these are all residual past thoughts and actions. And what happens is when we're a baby, we're born. Obviously, we are dependent on our mother, we're dependent on our father, and dependent on building that bond with our mother and father and having that certainty that we are safe, we are loved, and we are protected, and we can feel secure. Now, when we are rejected by our mothers and fathers, then obviously we feel insecure, and this creates trauma. This creates separation, and this creates a break within our own identities. And obviously, as a baby, you learn to feed, you have your nappy change, you have your needs met. Your needs are met by your parents, and your parents' job is to raise the child to be themselves. Now, unfortunately, the majority of parents raise children to not make the same mistakes that they did. And unfortunately, that is the majority of parenting that goes on. They don't want their children to make the same mistakes as them, and that's pretty much what their parent is. I know my mum permanently didn't want me to be a teenage mother. Lo and behold, I've become a teenage mother. Um, but when you accept that your child is not an extension of you, they are their own individual person, that baby has a stages of growth to go through. So a baby will learn to open his eyes, and they expect this to do this by a certain age. A baby will learn to sit up, a baby will learn to crawl, a baby will learn to walk. Now, it would be seen as completely natural that these progressions would go ahead. Now, a baby, as long as it's being fed and stuff, if you leave a baby can be independent, it can teach these things itself. But babies model off of other people. So, obviously, a baby who's got an older sibling, who's potentially a toddler and walking, will see that baby is walking and will eventually learn through soup. But basically, they will learn to do these things themselves. It's all through trial and error. Now, obviously, there are physical conditions that can prevent the stages of growth. But there are also, I don't want to talk about sort of things that are solid, Down syndrome, all these sort of clusters of things where somebody may need sort of some form of psychological help to be able to accept their current reality for them. I'm talking about people where trauma has been created. And that trauma can be as literally as having a cord wrapped around your right neck when you were born. It could be the fact that it was a traumatic birth. It could just be the fact that, the baby didn't connect with the mum because the mum might have had a cesarean section. Mum might have had postnatal depression. Father may not be around and doesn't get to bond with the father. And there may not be any of their natural parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters. And these are all things that we need. We as individuals cannot meet our needs alone. We need relationships with others to be able to do that. We have to have a relationship with our mother and father, and then we have the relationships with our grandparents, which is different to our roles from our mothers, and we have our siblings and cousins and uncles and aunts. And all of these are different parts of who we are and different relationships that we have, and we need these. Now, obviously, if you're not growing up in that and you're growing up in a single mother, then obviously that is going to dent your identity and person of who you are. And sorry, single mothers cannot meet the needs of a child alone. It's just tough shit. You can't. A mother cannot be mother and father. We can do the best that we can, but ultimately children need two parents, a mother and a father. And no, not a mother and a mother and not a dada and a dada. They need a mother and a father. So at the end of the day, we grow up, and sometimes, obviously we go through the education system, we face bullying, we face rejection, we face trauma. It may just even be as a young girl that you like dancing, you might be a majorette, you might be part of a colour guard, and there's always going to be somebody better than you, somebody worse than you, or somebody who wants to do something that you're doing. There's always going to be some form of competition. Now, trauma can be caused just as much as, saving your pocket money to buy a balloon, that balloon pops, and that's caused you trauma. It could even be the fact that you have a hamster and that hamster dies and that causes you trauma. All these things that cause us trauma ultimately take us away from our own identity. Now, if you deal with things as and when they happen, you cry when you hurt, you're happy when you're happy, you're angry when you're angry, you're fucking pissed off when you're fucking pissed off. And if you can express and disperse of these energies and emotions as and when they happen, then we can have healthy relationships with ourselves. Now, unfortunately, we don't live in a society like that. We live in a society where, if the receptionist at the doctor's surgery has completely just messed everything up, that you have to say, oh, that's okay then. And there's signs, do not express anger, blah, blah, blah. Even MPs. We've got MPs out there that are refusing to take cases of parents that we've had to go onto social media in order to interact with them, and we're classed as trolls. No, they are not doing their job. It's trauma. It's all trauma. If you're in a car crash, it's trauma. If you have a car crash and you end up with whiplash, you've caused trauma. Now, they will then say that that whiplash will last X, Y, and Z. Nobody ever says that you have whiplash permanently. But psychology is doing this to people. I'm in a world and a community of parents who have had children taken, and parents have been labelled with conditions, but these labels have become them and define them. And I disagree with this. I do not believe that we are our labels. I do not believe whether you've got a physical condition, mental health matter, or a learning child, that our country can come across and class you as disabled. If you live with the mindset that you are disabled, therefore you are disabled. If you believe you're disabled, then you will only focus on what you can't do. You will focus on your limitations. You will focus on your can'ts. You won't ever focus on what you can do, because your brain is not going to want to lie to you. So if government have come along and given you a big rubber stamp and gone, boom, disabled, your brain has to accept that as a truth. So if, say, they come across and say, hey, you've got depression, take a pill, and then they stick you on these antidepressants, which actually are causing you more problems, more side effects, and actually don't treat the real cause of why you are depressed. Yes, it might stabilize some dopamine and some serotonin, but that's the, diet and exercise can do that. Pills, just pill pushing it. And it's exactly the same whether they're putting you on, if you say you have anxiety and they put you on pills, well, all pill is doing is masking the anxiety. All it's doing is masking your emotions. Any form of, even if you take drugs or drink alcohol, all that's doing is masking the emotion. It's not helping you deal with the trauma at cause. And what I don't like about psychology is all they will do is they will ask you about sexual, physical, emotional abuse, and then you are labelled and defined. To say somebody is a child abuse victim is traumatic in itself. I was a child who had, children that were sexual, and obviously I ended up in a gang rape. When you live by the label of child sexual abuse, you take on the whole energy of that entire meaning, and yours might not be as violent or raw as somebody else's, but your trauma that you're taking on that diagnosis is exactly the same. And I see these parents who say, my anxiety or my depression, okay, I get that you're taking responsibility for it, but you are projecting it into the future. To realise that you've had trauma, so you don't have to go, I've got post-traumatic stress disorder. I am in post-traumatic stress because, every time somebody says something to me about, obviously, adoption, it triggers me. So that causes me further trauma. So that adds trauma onto my trauma. But what I don't like about psychology is what it does is it not just masks, it alienates the trauma and it focuses on the leaf. So basically, if we take an oak tree and we take the acorn is the trauma, okay? So what you could do is just get rid of the acorn, okay? And then there is no oak tree, and there are no branches, and there are no leaves, and there is no root to this trauma, okay? So obviously this big oak tree is now becoming, we like oak trees, by the way, they're very beautiful, but this big oak tree from this little acorn has become this gigantic oak tree that has got its roots well into the earth and its branches well out, and it is not going anywhere. But you could have just dealt with the acorn in the first place. Now, it doesn't matter what happened to you as a child, or it does matter, but it doesn't matter now. I'm 40 years old, and my main traumatic time was when I was about 11.
But I'm not my 11-year-old self, but the energy within me is. Now, we get a new body every 7 years. Every 7 years, our body changes and re-DNAs, and we actually have a whole new body every 7 years. We don't have the same body 7 years ago. It's not the same. The skin is not the same. The blood is not the same. Even my nose might look the same, but it's not the same nose. I know that's probably quite difficult to get your head around, but this is not the same nose from the day that I was born. My skin has shedded goodness knows how many times, and it changes shape and grows as we get on. I've got the same little cubs on it, but at the end of the day, that DNA is constantly keep replacing and rejuvenating. Every time I go to sleep, my body is self-healing. Now, what I'm wanting to say to the people who are listening, because I'm going to cut out in a minute, is when you go to see a therapist, you should be able to talk about your trauma. Now, the problem with why people don't heal is they can't go to the root of the trauma. They can't go to the root of their feelings. And what a therapist should be doing is taking you through that experience, taking you through why you hurt, why you had that pain, and accepting that pain and dealing with that pain and dealing with what happened to you. The reason that the majority of people have mental health is because they can't do this. They can't go through that pain barrier, and they can't deal with what's going on. And what's happening at the moment within the courts is literally psychologists. So the courts is just saying, right, we want an assessment on this parent. So the psychologist is going through the pupil's history, it's going through their medical notes, and probably years and years and years of going backwards and forwards and never quite getting to the root, and have deemed all these different labels and all these different things that have gone on. So, you know, it's then ended up in this oak tree. So then what happens is basically they get the report, and the report will come back to say that mother has depression, or mother has borderline personality, even father is aggressive. But what it's not doing is dealing with the acorn. And then the worst thing is parents are then not given the time to get the therapy. And they say that obviously children are taken and then adopted within that time, or they say that parents won't work with the system. Now, when people look at drugs, alcohol, sexual violation, any of these sort of things, they're just looking at the leaves. It's not dealing with the root. Somebody might be lonely, they might be feeling isolated, they might be going through confidence issues. It may just be the fact that they don't know who they are, because we've grown up in a society that says that we have to get up, you know, go to school, listen to these lectures, sit down in your chair, do as you're told, do these homework things, and then we've got to go to college and uni, and then we've got to go to work, and we've got to get up every morning and go and do a job to be able to pay our bills. And all in all, that we're not living the true life that we were meant to be, and we're wondering why we feel frustrated, and everybody's breaking down, and everybody's feeling really frustrated, trying to keep, you know, the mortgages going, the bills going to work, trying to still be there for their children, trying to be there for their partners. Relationships are breaking down left, right, and centre. You know, we have so many choices out there that people are making bad choices that are costing them consequences that are, you know, sometimes taking years to get back to their true self. So now we've got this system where everybody's focused on mental health, everybody's focusing on the label. And the worst thing that I'm seeing is all these videos about narcissists, and what they're telling you is to stay away from them. But if you look at who they're saying these narcissists are, which actually has nothing to do with narcissism, you know, they're saying that these are people that have been through childhood trauma, and, you know, obviously have lack of trust, and now all of a sudden they're being alienated again. This is not good. This is not real. You know, and they're basically saying that if somebody has been through sexual, physical, emotional abuse, that there's no way of treating them. There's no way of them ever being, you know, members of society. And this is bollocks, because at the end of the day, it's not what happened to you, it's what it means to you. Now, you could say, or I could say, that I was abused as a child, and it makes me a victim. And I have depression. And now I've got all of these different labels. And now I'm fucked up in the head, and I'm mentally deranged, and I'm dealing with all my trauma. Or you could say, I went through this experience,
And do you know what? It damn hurt me, and it was wrong. And I don't necessarily agree with the way people dealt with it. But do you know what it did? It taught me to make stronger boundaries. It taught me to safeguard myself. And not only that, it taught me to make sure I safeguarded my kids. I might not have been able to protect myself, but I'm now able to use that experience to now protect my children. Now I can learn about this stuff. And actually, what I've learned from it is I'm stronger because I've overcome this situation. So it's whether what you accept as your truth. What kills you makes you stronger. What makes you stronger doesn't kill you. They're two very different beliefs. I've just actually fucked up the first one, but there you go. But you know, your beliefs and your mindset and your story is what decides whether or not you live in that trauma, or whether you can go through that trauma and just accept that it happened to you, or whether you're going to create this going on year in, year out, year in, year out. Christmas causes me trauma every year because Christmas, obviously I've got 2 children missing. Straight away I haven't got my mum and my dad, you know, and I have this idea of what I believe Christmas should be like. So that creates me trauma because it doesn't match my expectations to my reality, and that alone is trauma in itself. But the reason that I wanted to say this is because I've got lots of parents who believe that they are the labels that they've been given. They define themselves by these labels, and a lot of people are really scared to get the correct therapy as well, because obviously people are going through psychology through the courts, and they're struggling then to access psychology in the normal way because they're scared of what was going to be said. And also a lot of people are scared of being sectioned. We all have the right to talk to people. We all have the right to get what we want of our chest. You know, social media has proved one thing: everybody wants a voice, everybody's got something to say. You know, everybody is finding where they fit in the world through social media. But again, I can be trolled. Somebody can tell me that what I'm saying is a load of shit. I can either brush this off like water on a duck's back, or it could cause me trauma. And if I allow these layers of trauma to get onto my chest, then eventually I'm going to feel suppressed, and then I'm going to feel depressed, and then I'm going to get trapped up in my head. Yeah, and then my heart is going to feel broken, and then people can look at me and point fingers and go, she's mad. Or, you know, I may just find that one day I turn around and I bite the wrong person's head off because of trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma, and then bang. And we can only take so much. Everybody has a breakdown. Everybody has days where they just want to put their hands in their hands and just cry. Everybody goes through some form of grief, even if they lose a parent, lose a friend. If we don't experience that grief as and when we had it, and we bottle it up, eventually it's going to explode. And then that's when people point fingers and lock people down in sections. But at the end of the day, with every breakdown comes a breakthrough, and we need that emotional intelligence. But I am not borderline personality, and I'm certainly not narcissistic traits. I'm very empathetic, actually. I'm not even Ehlers Danlos syndrome. The labels that psychology is giving us doesn't define us. Even my name, my dad gave it to me because he had a crush on some woman called Kelly. Warrior maiden it means, but that doesn't define me. It's not who I am. I choose who I am. I choose how I want to be and how I perceive myself. And the only thing that will ever get into my way is the opinions and beliefs of other people. And I'm not willing to sit down and listen to psychology. Even what's her name? Victoria Childs. You know, she was at a meeting the other day where she apologised on the behalf of psychology because parents were being labelled, and these labels were then classing them to be significant risk. A significant risk of what? Because nobody is actually saying what it's going to do. Oh, I've got borderline personality. So, okay, what does that mean to my parenting then? Because I tell you what, if I had an arm missing, my children wouldn't judge me. If my leg had been amputated, my children wouldn't judge me. If I'd been in a car crash and I'm laying in a coma and I have a brain injury and I come home, my children would still embrace me. But psychology would cause that a significant risk, and social social care would call that, trauma to a child, and they would want to protect that. You can't protect our children from trauma. We all experience trauma every day. Even if you step out into a road and a car comes and you step back, there's trauma. It's how you deal with that trauma. And that's the toolbox that we all need. How to deal with life. Because it's just a coping mechanism. All of it is. Religion, meditation, all of it is just a coping mechanism on how to deal with life. Know who you are, know what you're about, know what you stand for, and get on and do that. And live with passion, live with integrity. And it's a journey, because who we were at 15 isn't the same now, and it ain't going to be the same at 50. We're here to grow, we're here to change, and we're also here to grow and change the world that we currently live in. And psychology is outdated. Psychology is so behind. We're still going back to people being in institutions with people walking around with mace. We've still got police that are, sectioning people who are feeling suicidal. If somebody's feeling suicidal, they don't need sectioning. They don't need trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma. People who need somebody to talk to don't need to be locked into an institution where they're forced to take medication every day, hold their tongue out just to make sure that they've swallowed it. People don't need to be going to their doctors given 5 minutes, here, have a pill. What people need is to be able to express themselves, to be able to talk. And sometimes you can go, do you know what? I feel like fucking killing the kids today. And that's not actually how you really feel. Once you verbalize something, you go, I don't really feel that way. But unfortunately, we live in society where someone's going, did you see? She just said she's going to kill her kids. Whoa, let's get in there. Quick, please. Sight everybody. Yeah? Why does nobody go, want a coffee, love? Not that coffee's the greatest thing to drink. But sometimes we just need a chat. Sometimes we just need to get things off our chest. And with that, the trauma can just completely disperse. But that doesn't mean that we have to go and sit down where somebody can do an analysis of us and all of a sudden we're defined by a label that we have to live by. You are not your labels. You are more than your labels. In fact, you're nothing to do with your labels. They were just your past thoughts and residual actions that got you to this point now. Where you choose to go from here is up to you. You can keep taking your trauma with you, or you can leave your trauma right here. Write it down in the comments. Tell me what traumatized you. Leave it here and go and get on with your life. Trauma free. So yeah, is psychology the problem? I think it is. I think it's the biggest problem in family courts. Nobody ever knows anybody, and they're trusting psychologists to be able to say something. And at the end of the day, if you really want to know somebody, ask them what they love to do. Why focus on the trauma? Because through trauma, you can create some beautiful, 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 beautiful magic. That was created through trauma. So it's how you express it, it's how you deal with it, and it's how you choose to overcome it. And psychology cannot label you and tell you that that is who you are going to be from the cradle to the grave, because all these labels that they're giving you, you're not born with it. You weren't born with borderline personality. It's not a personality, it's a trauma. None of these things are personalities. Your personality is about your characteristics. You artistic, you draw, you dance, you into creating things, you like to build things. Is it nature? Are you love animals? Do you want to look after children? That's about who you are. Your character, whether you're giving, loving, kind, compassionate, if you've got integrity, whether you love thy neighbour, whether or not you will help somebody, how you will treat somebody who lives on the streets. And don't call them homeless. My friend Alan, he's not a homeless man, he's my friend Alan. So, and crackheads and smackheads, they're not crackheads and smackheads. They were probably somebody who got cracked and smacked around the head and don't know how to deal with their trauma, and they mask it with drugs and alcohol, and then you come along and cause more trauma by calling them a smack and a crackhead. No, they were once children who were hurt and don't know how to deal with it, and have grown up with that trauma and don't know how to release that trauma. That's all I've got to say. So please remember They might have labelled you, but it doesn't define you. And it's not who you are. And it's up to you to find out who you are, what your purpose is, why you're here, what your boundaries are, and to not really give a shit about what everybody else thinks. Now, the only reason psychology matters is because these labels are having our kids taken, and it stinks. So anyway, we are more than a label. Psychology, you've got a lot to answer for. And as I was saying about Victoria, she's apologised on behalf of the whole psychology unit for what it's doing to parents by separating children and families and causing trauma. That these children are then going to grow up with more labels and more behavioural issues that people are trying to understand, when the root of it was they were removed from their families. And then parents like me are then labelled with disenfranchised grief and post-traumatic stress disorder, when the root of it was our children were taken from us, which caused us trauma. It hurt. In fact, it hurts every day. But I'm not my grief. I'm just learning to deal with my grief. And I'm not post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm just learning to deal with the triggers. But they're the ones who cause this, and they're the ones that are responsible for it. I'm the one that's got to live with it, and so are my kids. But that doesn't give them the right to label me and define me, because I'm ultimately a really beautiful woman, and I know I've got a good heart, and I know my intentions are really good, and it doesn't really matter what anybody else is saying, because I know why I'm here, why I'm doing this. And it's about time psychology was held accountable, because you know, it's real life, real people, real feelings, real emotions, and we need the connection with other people. We need to trust. We need to feel stable, and we need to contribute, and we need to grow, and we need to love, and we need to have connection. And all they're doing is separating us and alienating us, and everybody's just pointing the fingers. And even more so, you know, they're getting people to walk around and go, I have mental health. No, yes, mental health, not mental disease. What you don't have is the tools and the emotional intelligence to deal with your trauma. And once you learn to deal with your trauma, then that acorn never becomes the oak tree. We like oak trees, as I've said. Deal with the acorn, deal with the root, and then you don't get all of this stuff. Psychology, they're dealing with all this stuff, and they're just using weed killer. But it isn't getting to the root of the problem. And it's time we get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is that our families have been separated and trauma has been created. And the only way we can fix that is to reunite our families. And actually, the whole of the world needs to start doing this. Whatever your difference is to your family member, then there is a way for you to realise they're not an extension of you. They're a separate part of your family. And your family, one person all living, doing what they, you know, love, ultimately makes a community. So, you know, really this should be about families, and it really now is about the courts kicking everybody out and telling them to get to family mediation, deal with your trauma, deal with your issues, and deal with it within your family. We don't need this system. We should be able to deal with things within our family. And if somebody has suffered within them, our family should be picking that up. And if we stick together as a family, then there's no reason for anyone to be alienated and kicked into institutions and living by themselves, because then we have loneliness. And with loneliness comes trauma. And then we go around the cycle again. So anyway, this was quite traumatizing for me. So I'm going to go and deal with my trauma so I don't project my trauma onto you. And don't let them do it to you too. You know, you're not the labels that they've given you. It doesn't define you. So wash them out, rip them up. Do you want to know what labels are for before I go? That's what labels are for. It's a tin of tomatoes. It says exactly what it is on the tin. It's a tin of tomatoes. Whether it's in Asda, whether it's in Tesco's, it's still a tin of tomatoes. And that's what labels are for. Because if I wrote every label I have ever been given all over my face and all on my body, I'd be very depressed. So now, get rid of the labels, get rid of them, and write, I love me. And the moment you start loving yourself, you can start loving everybody else in the natural manner. Don't matter. So anyway, that's me talking about psychology. Bye.